Okay, we seem to be up and running. And yes, we do. So, hello, greetings, good to see you. I'm Tad. I'll be here for about another hour, roughly. It is 7 p.m. here in California, and I will be reading from The Sword and the Stone. Depends on how much of the broadcast I waste babbling, because I do babble a bit. Not, I'm not senile yet. I probably actually, except for the occasional moment of going, what the hell am I doing? Where the hell am I? And what the hell was I meaning to do? Which actually started much earlier in my life, and probably has something to do with decades of abuse. Not by other people, but me, myself. But anyway, I am here. I will be here. I have no choice. Well, I do. I have lots of choices, but I enjoy being here. So that's what I mean. Of course, I have a choice. But I consider this to be a sacred time that I put aside every weekend to hang out with all of you. So anyway, thank you for joining me. It's a pleasure, as always, to see you, albeit primarily virtually. Speaking of not knowing words, I'm going to just momentarily turn up the air conditioning. It's not an air conditioner, it's an ionic breeze thing. But just to get some of the cat dander out of my face here for a moment. So if you hear a quiet whooshing noise, that's what's going on. However, anything to talk about? I mostly went through a lot of the stuff of the week last night, which early this morning, which was not very interesting because I was just explaining I'm working on The Splintered Sun. I think I went into a long diatribe or tangent or whatever you want to call it about how I choose the names of books because Andre asked me a question, and I was delighted to get a question. Okay, Christy is now asking, how can I get your newsletter? I don't think we've sent it out yet, but I believe if you look somewhere on my page here, and I'm looking at it myself. No, that's from Andy Angel. I thought Deborah posted something about sending to her, care of her address, her email address. God, but now I can't find it, of course. That would be too easy to be able to look for something and then find it. But I will get that information. I will post it on my page. And I'm sorry for not being more full of useful information right at the moment, because Deb may have given out her email address, but I don't know that, and I don't want to do it without checking with her first. She did post something as to, maybe it was on the other page, that the Tad's author page on Facebook. Let me see if I'm just checking this as long as I'm on. No, that's all old stuff. Deb posting. Let's see. No, I don't think she's put anything on here. Okay, I will find out. I will post it on my two Facebook pages. So sorry about that. My apologies, Christy. I should have that information to hand. I should have lots of things organized, but I am. Yeah, Angie says, I saw it but didn't see a link. Were we supposed to DM her in Facebook? That probably, she has a Facebook account, so that might be a good plan. We haven't sent it out, the most recent one. We're going to get back to doing it regularly again. I only realized a few weeks ago that we had been almost a year since the last one. Now, admittedly, it was an extremely chaotic year with us moving twice and all kinds of stuff. Between last summer and now, it's been all nutsy. Summer before last and now. Anyway, so I will look into that, and but yes, try DMing Deb on Facebook and just telling her, give her your email address. This is not an old-fashioned newsletter that goes out on paper. It actually is environmentally friendly. And you can get the babblings of Tad and the occasional words of wisdom from Deborah in a handy dandy electronic form. And as I always say, because this is super important to me, we don't, as you can see, we haven't sent one out for a year, but we don't bombard people with stuff. We don't do anything with your information. We don't, keep trying to sell you things or, send you little nudge messages or push messages or anything like that. Basically, when we're going right, once every month or two, we send out a newsletter. And it's basically just I write something for it, Deb writes something for it. If there's anything of interest, we mention it, and that's about it. So it's a pretty, here we are in the midst of the great commercialization of the information age. And Deb and I are still puttering along, kind of doing the age of steam. But that's okay. That's okay. That's what we choose to do. It's become so ridiculous at times, like just, with the various social media, trying to wade through the ads that are now like water hyacinths. Water hyacinths are one of those invasive plants that like kudzu, but they're water based. So when they get into like the canals and stuff, they just grow and grow and grow until they choke off the waterways. And it's beginning to feel on almost all social media that, the ads are growing like kudzu or water hyacinths and are just taking over everything. And even I, in my sort of cursory way, have noticed it. And I'm sure those who are on even more than I am have noticed it even more sharply and more painfully. Anyway, so that's the skinny, as it were, on the on the newsletter, and I will try to get information. Let me check in and see who has said hello. And I see Sonia and Jeremy. Hello, both of you. Angie, of course, I already mentioned something that Angie had posted. Ray Weatherford. Hello, Ray. Tracy, good to see you. Isaac. Medardo Landon Mazadueñas. Good name, Medardo. Why couldn't I have been named something like that instead of Tad? Or worse, my real name. I mean, not worse, but Robert Williams. I would have been Bob Williams. I just never wrapped my head around that. But then again, nobody ever called me Robert except for substitute teachers and telemarketers. Okay, who else have I not said hello to? There's Barban. Hello, Barban. Ivan. Hello, buddy. Tim, Speckens, Kelly, Kenrick, Claudia. Hello, Christy, who I just spoke to, and Janice and Hampson. Those have all commented, so we're happening there. I hope I've checked in with everybody who has made their presences known. As I often say, I am forced against my will. I am forced to try and figure these things out, and the whole Facebook broadcasting thing has a very weird what's the word I want? A very weird relationship with comments. And, sometimes it seems like they hide them, they put them in odd places, they divvy them up in odd ways. Whereas if I don't think most relevant should be the baseline setting for comments. I mean, yeah, if you're getting hundreds of thousands of comments, but that's never been the case with me. And I would really rather have somebody like myself sifting through those comments to decide what's valuable instead of some kind of AI, which knows nothing. And especially when it's a relatively small number of comments, why do I need to have most relevant as my default setting? Anyway, okay, I'm ranting again. I can't help it. It's one of the things that happens when you get to a certain age and you see things that seem really stupid and, they just go on and on and on. I mean, war, everything, right? Stupidity. Stupidity is a thriving business, folks. It's still out there. It's still very common. I don't mind stupidity when it's not the fault of the individual, when they're just legitimately, for whatever reason, they've been given short shrift in life. They've never been educated, or, they were raised in a cult or something. I mean, I don't blame people for not grasping reality too well, if that's the situation. But willful stupidity, no, I despise willful stupidity. And for me, willful stupidity is the refusal to admit you might be wrong. And it's been the major work of my adult life is trying to get better at saying things like, I really don't know. Let's look it up. Let's try to get an answer. Let's find out. And I hope my kids benefited. That's when I started to do it, was when we had kids. And I realized it was very common for me because I know, as I've mentioned before, I know a little bit about a lot of things. And in the past, I have often said, oh, I bet it's this, or I think it's this, or it's probably this, or sometimes even just, it's this, based on some things I'd read. And once I had kids, I realized I'm not teaching them a good lesson. The lesson of go ask dad is not a good lesson for life, because whatever your source of information is, there may be something wrong with it. Your dad could be senile. Your dad could just be an idiot. Both of these things, of course, were possible for my children. So I made it very clear to them, don't rely on other people to tell you things. Go find out. Do your best. Learn. And as you will see not tonight, I don't think, but further on in The Sword and the Stone, there is one of T.H. White's greatest quotes, which is about, which I posted on my page the other day, which is about, how you can always learn things. That's no matter what else is taken from you or corrupted or ruined, you can always learn things. And we will get to that section before too awfully long, but we're not there yet. Anyway, so anything else I wanted to talk about before hitting the book? No, I don't think so. Did anybody have any more questions or anything they were asking? Because that's always, they're always welcome. Questions are always welcome. And now all the comments are gone. Why are all the comments gone? I don't know. Why can't I see the comments? Piffle. Okay, let's try that. And let's go to that page and see if we've got comments on there. Jay, my friend Jay Sheckley says, "You're wonderful." Of course, I could be wrong. Thank you, Jay. And Alexis, hello. Good to see you, Tertian. A pleasure. All righty. So, funny comments. You guys are funny. And serves you right. Because funny is dangerous. Anyway, so I am going to start reading. What we were reading last night, or early this morning, however you choose to parse it out, was that Wart, bored almost to the point of despair, convinced Merlin to turn him into something. And Wart wanted to be a bird. The Wart wanted to be a bird. And Merlin pointed out that it's a rainy day. The birds don't fly around. But after much complaining from Wart and much begging, Merlin finally said, all right, I'll turn you into a hawk, a falcon actually, a hawk, and using the most general term. And we will put you in the mews, M-E-W-S, the mews with the other hawks. And they will all be in there for the night, so nobody's going anywhere. You don't have to fly or anything, but you will have to stand and you will learn from them. And Merlin gave him a few tips, including don't go near Cully. Cully, you may remember, is the hawk that they chased down, eventually caught earlier on in the book when Wart first met Merlin. And Merlin has basically said, whatever you do, Cully's in a mesh cage. Don't go near him. If he gets his claw on you, you will not get out of there alive, which is a bit of a scary message. So he's been in there with the peregrine falcon, she is the leader of this particular, Merlin likens it to an officer's mess for like flyers. This would have been the very early days of the RAF when he was writing this, or immediately after the Second World War when the RAF was, still the heroes of the Battle of Britain. And Wart has been questioned because he is an unfamiliar falcon, Merlin specifically, in the mews, and he is being questioned by the peregrine, who is the leader, the colonel, as they call her, and several others as well are all joining in. So they've been asking him a number of questions to kind of figure out whether he can be part of their group. And they've just asked him a question about how he would kill a pigeon that was bigger than him, and I will continue with the reading from there. Wart was lucky in this one, for he had heard Hob giving a description of how Balin did it one afternoon, and he answered warily, "I should strangle her with my foot." "Good," said the peregrine. "Bravo!" cried the others, raising their feathers. 90%, said the sparhawk after a quick sum. "That is, if you give him half for the talons." "The devil damn me black!" "Colonel, please." Balin whispered to the wart, "Colonel Cully is not quite right in his wits. It is his liver, we believe, but the kestrel says it is the constant strain of living up to her ladyship's standard. He says that her ladyship spoke to him from her full social station once, cavalry to infantry, and that he just closed his eyes and got the vertigo. He has never been the same since." "Captain Balin," said the peregrine, "it is rude to whisper. We will proceed to swear the new officer in. Now, Padre, if you please." The poor sparhawk, who had been getting more and more nervous for some time, blushed deeply and began faltering out a complicated oath about varvels, jesses, and hoods. "With this varvel," the wart heard, "I thee endow, love, honor, and obey, till jess us do part." But before the padre had got to the end of it, he broke down altogether and sobbed out, "Oh, please, your ladyship, I beg your pardon, but I have forgotten to keep my tirings." "Tirings are bones and things," explained Balin, "and of course you have to swear on bones." "Forgotten to keep any tirings? But it is your duty to keep tirings." I know." "What have you done with them?" The sparhawk's voice broke at the enormity of his confession. I ate 'em," wept the unfortunate priest. Nobody said anything. The dereliction of duty was too terrible for words. All stood on 2 feet and turned their blind heads toward the culprit. Not a word of reproach was spoken. Only, during an utter silence of 5 minutes, they could hear the incontinent priest sniveling and hiccuping to himself. "Well," said the peregrine at last, "the initiation will have to be put off till tomorrow." If you will excuse me, madam," said Balin, "perhaps we could manage the ordeal tonight. I believe the candidate is loose, for I did not hear him being tied up." At the mention of an ordeal, the wart trembled within himself. Oh, sorry, they've actually misprinted that in this version of the book. It should be, "If you will excuse me, madam," said Balin. So there's Balan and Balin, both falcons, both merlins, I believe. "If you will excuse me, madam," said Balin, "perhaps we could manage the ordeal tonight. I believe the candidate is loose, for I did not hear him being tied up." At the mention of an ordeal, the wart trembled within himself and privately determined that Balin should have not one feather of Balan's sparrow the next day. "Thank you, Captain Balin. I was reflecting upon that subject myself." Balin shut up. "Are you loose, candidate?" "Oh, madam, yes, I am, if you please, but I do not think I want an ordeal. The ordeal is customary." "Let me see," continued the honorary colonel reflectively. "What was the last ordeal we had? Can you remember, Captain Balin?" "My ordeal, ma'am," said the friendly Merlin, "was to hang by my jesses during the 3rd watch." "If he is loose, he cannot do that." "You could strike him yourself, ma'am," said the kestrel, judiciously, you know. Send him over to stand by Colonel Cully while we ring 3 times. Oh, no! Cried the crazy colonel in an agony out of his remoter darkness. Oh, no, your ladyship, I beg of you not to do that. I am such a damned villain, your ladyship, that I could not answer for the consequences. Spare the poor boy, your ladyship, and lead us not into temptation. Colonel, control yourself. That ordeal will do very well. Oh, madam, I was warned not to stand by Colonel Cully. Warned? And by whom? The poor wart realized that now he must choose between confessing himself a human and learning no more of their secrets, or going through with this ordeal to earn his education. He did not want to be a coward. I will stand by the colonel, madam, he said, immediately noticing that his voice sounded insulting. The peregrine falcon paid no attention to the tone. It is well, she said, but first we must have the hymn. Now, Padre, if you have not eaten your hymns as well as your tirings, will you be so kind as to lead us in ancient but not modern number 23, the Ordeal Hymn? And you, Mr. Key, she added to the kestrel, you had better keep quiet, for you are always too high. The hawk stood still in the moonlight, while the sparhawk counted 1, 2, 3. Then all those curved or toothed beaks opened in their hoods to a brazen unison, and this is what they chanted. Life is blood, shed and offered. The eagle's eye can face this dree. To beasts of chase the lie is proffered. Timor mortis conturbat me. The beast of foot sings, hold fast only. For flesh is bruckle, and foot is slee. Strength to the strong, and the lordly and lonely. Timor mortis exultat me. Shame to the slothful, and woe to the weak one. Death to the dreadful who turn to flee. Blood to the tearing, the taloned, the beaked one. Timor mortis are we. Very nice, said the peregrine. Captain Balin, I think you were a little off on the top C. And now, candidate, you will go over and stand next to Colonel Cully's enclosure, while we ring our bells thrice. On the 3rd ring, you may move as quickly as you like. Very good, madam, said the wart, quite fearless with resentment. He flipped his wings and was sitting on the extreme end of the screen perch, next to Cully's enclosure of string netting. Boy! Cried the colonel in an unearthly voice. Don't come near me! Don't come near! Tempt not the foul fiend to his damnation. I do not fear you, sir, said the wart. Do not vex yourself, for no harm will come to either of us. No harm, quotha! Go, before it is too late. I feel eternal longings in me. Never fear, sir. They have only to ring 3 times. At this, the knights lowered their raised legs and gave them a solemn shake. The first sweet tinkling filled the room. Madam! Madam! Cried the colonel in torture. Have pity! Have pity on a damned man of blood! Ring out the old, ring in the new! I can't hold off much longer. Be brave, sir, said the wart softly. Be brave, sir? Why, but 2 nights since, one met the Duke about midnight in a lane behind St. Mark's Church with the leg of a man upon his shoulder, and he howled fearfully. It is nothing, said the wart. Nothing? Said he was a wolf.
Only the difference was a wolf's skin was hairy on the outside, his on the inside. Rip up my flesh and try. Ah, for quietus with a bare bodkin.
The bells rang for the second time. The wart's heart was thumping, and now the colonel was sidling toward him along the perch. Stamp, stamp, he went, striking the wood he trod on with a convulsive grip at every pace. His poor, mad, brooding eyes glared in the moonlight, shone against the persecuted darkness of his scowling brow. There was nothing cruel about him, no ignoble passion. He was terrified of the wart, not triumphing, and he must slay.
If it were done when 'tis done, whispered the colonel, then 'twere well it were done quickly. Who would have thought the young man had so much blood in him?
Colonel, said the wart, but held himself there.
Boy, cried the colonel, speak! Stop me! Mercy!
There is a cat behind you, said the wart calmly, or a pine marten. Look! The colonel turned, swift as a wasp's sting, and menaced into the gloom. There was nothing. He swung his wild eyes again upon the wart, guessing the trick. Then, in the cold voice of an adder,
the bell invites me. Hear it not, young Merlin, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell.
The third bells were indeed ringing as he spoke, and honor was allowed to move. The ordeal was over, and the wart might fly, but as he flew quicker than any movement or flight in the world, the terrible sickles had shot from the colonel's plated legs, not flashed out, for they moved too quick for sight, and with a thump, with a clutch, with an apprehension like being arrested by a big policeman, the great scimitars had fixed themselves in his retreating thumb. They fixed themselves and fixed irrevocably. Gripe, the enormous thigh muscles tautened in two convulsions. Then the wart was 2 yards further down the screen, and Colonel Cully was standing on one foot with a few meshes of string netting and the wart's false primary, with its covert feathers, vice-fisted in the other. 2 or 3 minor feathers drifted softly in a moonbeam towards the floor.
Well stood, cried Balin, delighted.
A very gentlemanly exhibition, said the peregrine, not minding that Captain Balin had spoken before her.
Amen, said the sparhawk. Brave heart, said the kestrel. Might we give him the triumph song? Asked Balin, relenting.
Certainly, said the peregrine, and they all sang together, led by Colonel Cully at the top of his voice, all belling triumphantly in the terrible moonlight. The mountain birds are sweeter, but the valley birds are fatter, and so we deemed it meeter to carry off the latter. We met a cowering coney and struck him through the vitals. The coney was like honey and squealed our requitals. Some struck the lark in feathers, whose puffing clouds were shed off, while some plucked the partridge's nethers, while others pulled his head off. But Wart, the king of Merlins, struck foot most far before us. His birds and beasts supply our feasts, and his feats our glorious chorus. Mark my words, cried the beautiful Balin, we shall have a regular king in that young candidate. Now, boys, chorus all together for the last time. But Wart, the king of Merlins, struck foot most far behind us. His birds and beasts supply our feasts, and his feats our glorious chorus. Chapter 9. Well, said the wart as he woke up in his own bed next morning, what a horrible grand crew. Kay sat up in bed and began scolding like a squirrel. Where were you last night? He cried. I believe you climbed out. I shall tell my father and get you tanned.
You know we're not allowed out after curfew. What have you been doing? I looked for you everywhere. I know you climbed out." The boys had a way of sliding down a rainwater pipe into the moat, which they could swim on secret occasions when it was necessary to be out at night, to wait for a badger, or, for instance, or to catch tench, which can only be taken just before dawn. "Oh, shut up," said the ward. "I'm sleepy." Kay said, "Wake up! Wake up, you beast! Where have you been?" "I shan't tell you." He was sure that Kay would not believe the story, but only call him a liar and get angrier than ever. "If you don't tell me, I shall kill you." "You will not, then." "I will." The wart turned over on his other side. "Beast," said Kay. He took a fold of the wart's arm between the nails of his first finger and thumb, and he pinched for all he was worth. Wart kicked like a salmon which has been suddenly hooked, and hit him wildly in the eye. In a trice they were out of bed, pale and indignant, looking rather like skinned rabbits, for in those days nobody wore clothes in bed, and whirling their arms like windmills in the effort to do each other a mischief. Kay was older and bigger than the wart, so that he was bound to win in the end, but he was more nervous and imaginative. He could imagine the effect of each blow that was aimed at him, and this weakened his defense. Wart was only an infuriated hurricane. "Leave me alone, can't you?" And all the while he did not leave Kay alone, but with head down and swinging arms made it impossible for Kay to do as he was bid. They punched entirely at each other's faces. Kay had a longer reach and a heavier fist. He straightened his arm more in self-defense than in anything, and the wart smacked his own eye upon the end of it. The sky became a noisy and shocking black, streaked outward with a blaze of meteors. The wart began to sob and pant. He managed to get in a blow upon his opponent's nose, and this began to bleed. Kay lowered his defense, turned his back on the wart, and said in a cold, snuffling, reproachful voice, "Now it's bleeding." The battle was over. Kay lay on the stone floor, bubbling blood out of his nose, and the wart, with a black eye, fetched the enormous key out of the door to put under Kay's back. Neither of them spoke. Presently Kay turned over on his face and began to sob. He said, "Merlin does everything for you, but he never does anything for me." At this, the wart felt he had been a beast. He dressed himself in silence and hurried off to find the magician. On the way, he was caught by his nurse. "Oh, you little haylot!" exclaimed she, shaking him by the arm. "You've been a-battling again with that there Master Kay. Look at your poor eye, I do declare it's enough to baffle the College of Sturgeons." "It's all right," said the ward. "No, that it isn't, my poppet," cried his nurse, getting crosser and showing signs of slapping him. "Come now, how did you do it before I have you whipped?" "I knocked it on the bedpost," said the wart sullenly. The old nurse immediately folded him to her broad bosom, patted him on the back, and said, There, there, my Dosabel. It's the same story Sir Ector told me when I caught him with a blue eye gone 40 years. Nothing like a good family for sticking to a good lie. There, my innocent, you come along with me to the kitchen and we'll slap a nice bit of steak across him in no time. But you had not to fight with people bigger than yourself." "It is all right," said the ward again, disgusted by the fuss, but fate was bent on punishing him, and the old lady was inexorable. It took him half an hour to escape, and then only at the price of carrying with him a juicy piece of raw beef, which he was supposed to hold over his eye. "Nothing like a mealy rump for drawing out the humours," his nurse had said, and the cook had answered, "I hadn't seen a sweeter bit of raw since Easter. No, nor a bloodier." "I will keep the foul thing for Balin," thought the ward, resuming his search for his tutor. He found him without trouble in the tower room, which he had chosen when he arrived. All philosophers prefer to live in towers, as may be seen by visiting the room which Erasmus chose in his college at Cambridge. But Merlin's tower was even more beautiful than this.
It was the highest room in the castle, directly below the lookout of the great keep, and from its window you could gaze across the open field, with its rights of warren, across the park and the chase, until your eye finally wandered out over the distant blue treetops of the forest sauvage. This sea of leafy timber rolled away and away in knobs like the surface of porridge, until it was finally lost in remote mountains which nobody ever visited, and the cloud-capped towers and gorgeous palaces of heaven. Merlin's comments upon the black eye were of a medical nature. "The discoloration," he said, "is caused by hemorrhage into the tissues, ecchymosis, and passes from dark purple through green to yellow before it disappears." There seemed to be no sensible reply to this. "I suppose you had it," continued Merlin, "fighting with Kay." "Yes. How do you know?" "Ah, well, there it is." "I came to ask you about Kay." "Speak, demand, I'll answer." "Well, Kay thinks it is unfair that you are always turning me into things and not him. I have not told him about it, but I think he guesses. I think it is unfair, too." "It is unfair." "So, will you turn us both next time that we are turned?" Merlin had finished his breakfast and was puffing at the meerschaum pipe, which made his pupil believe that he breathed fire. Now he took a deep puff, looked at the wart, opened his mouth to speak, changed his mind, blew out the smoke, and drew another lungful. "Sometimes," he said, "life does seem to be unfair. Do you know the story of Elijah and the Rabbi Jackanan?" "No," said the wart. He sat down resignedly upon the most comfortable part of the floor, perceiving that he was in for something like the parable of the looking-glass. "This rabbi," said Merlin, "went on a journey with the prophet Elijah. They walked all day, and at nightfall they came to the humble cottage of a poor man, whose only treasure was a cow. The poor man ran out of his cottage, and his wife ran too, to welcome the strangers for the night and to offer them all the simple hospitality which they were able to give in straitened circumstances. Elijah and the rabbi were entertained with plenty of the cow's milk, sustained by homemade bread and butter, and they were put to sleep in the best bed while their kindly hosts lay down before the kitchen fire. But in the morning the poor man's cow was dead." "Go on." "They walked all the next day, and came that evening to the house of a very wealthy merchant, whose hospitality they craved. The merchant was cold and proud and rich, and all that he would do for the prophet and his companion was to lodge them in a cowshed and feed them on bread and water. In the morning, however, Elijah thanked him very much for what he had done, and sent for a mason to repair one of his walls, which happened to be falling down, as a return for his kindness. The Rabbi Jackanan, unable to keep silence any longer, begged the holy man to explain the meaning of his dealings with human beings. "In regard to the poor man who received us so hospitably," replied the prophet, "it was decreed that his wife was to die that night, but in reward for his goodness, God took the cow instead of the wife. I repaired the wall of the rich miser because a chest of gold was concealed near the place, and if the miser had repaired the wall himself, he would have discovered the treasure. Say not, therefore, to the Lord, 'What doest thou?' but say in thy heart, 'Must not the Lord of all the earth do right?'" "It is a nice sort of story," said the wart, because it seemed to be over. "I am sorry," said Merlin, "that you should be the only one to get my extra tuition, but then you see I was only sent for that." "I do not see that it would do any harm for Kay to come too." "Nor do I, but the Rabbi Jackanan did not see why the miser should have had his wall repaired." I understand that, said the wart doubtfully, but I still think it was a shame that the cow died. Could I not have Kay with me just once? Merlin said gently, Perhaps what is good for you might be bad for him. Besides, remember, he has never asked to be turned into anything. He wants to be turned, for all that. I like Kay, and I think people don't understand him. He has to be proud because he is frightened. You still do not follow what I mean. Suppose he had gone as a Merlin last night and failed in the ordeal and lost his nerve. How do you know about that ordeal? Ah, well, there it is again. Very well, said the wart obstinately, but suppose he had not failed in the ordeal and had not lost his nerve. I don't see why you should have to suppose that he would have. Oh, flout the boy, cried the magician passionately. You don't seem to see anything this morning. What is it that you want me to do? Turn me and Kay into snakes or something. Merlin took off his spectacles, dashed them on the floor, and jumped on them with both feet. Castor and Pollux, blow me to Bermuda, he exclaimed, and immediately vanished with a frightful roar. The wart was still staring at his tutor's chair in some perplexity a few moments later when Merlin reappeared. He had lost his hat, and his hair and beard were tangled up as if by a hurricane. He sat down again, straightening his gown with trembling fingers. Why did you do that? Asked the wart. I did not do it on purpose. Do you mean to say that Castor and Pollux did blow you to Bermuda? Let this be a lesson to you, replied Merlin, not to swear. I think we had better change the subject. We were talking about Kay. Yes, and what I was going to say before my my visit to the still vexed Bermudes was this. I cannot change Kay into things. The power was not deputed to me when I was sent. Why this was so, neither you nor I am able to say, but such remains the fact. I have tried to hint at some of the reasons for the fact, but you will not take them, so you must just accept the fact in its naked reality. Now, please stop talking until I have got my breath back, and my hat. The wart sat quiet while Merlin closed his eyes and began to mutter to himself. Presently, a curious black cylindrical hat appeared on his head. It was a top hat. Merlin examined it with a look of disgust, said bitterly, "And they call this service," and handed it back to the air. Finally, he stood up in a passion and exclaimed, "Come here!" The wart and Archimedes looked at each other, wondering which was meant. Archimedes had been sitting all the while on the window-sill and looking at the view, for of course he never left his master. But Merlin did not pay them any attention. "Now," said Merlin furiously, apparently to nobody, "do you think you are being funny? Very well, then, why do you do it?" "That is no excuse. Naturally, I meant the one I was wearing." "But wearing now, of course, you fool. I don't want a hat I was wearing in 1890. Have you no sense of time at all?" Merlin took off the sailor hat, which had just appeared, and held it out to the air for inspection. "This is an anachronism," he said severely. "That is what it is, a beastly anachronism." Archimedes seemed to be adjusted to these scenes, for he now said, in a reasonable voice, "Why don't you ask for the hat by name, master? Say I want my magician's hat, not I want the hat I was wearing. Perhaps the poor chap finds it as difficult to live backward as you do." "I want my magician's hat," said Merlin sulkily. Instantly the long pointed cone was standing on his head. The tension in the air relaxed. Wart sat down again on the floor, and Archimedes resumed his toilette, pulling his pinions and tail feathers through his beak to smooth the barbs together. Each barb had hundreds of little hooks or barbules on it, by means of which the barbs of the feathers were held together. He was stroking them into place.
Merlin said, "I beg your pardon. I am not having a very good day today, and there it is."
"About Kay?" said the wart. "Even if you can't change him into things, could you not give us both an adventure without changing?" Merlin made a visible effort to control his temper and to consider this question dispassionately. He was sick of the subject altogether.
"I cannot do any magic for Kay," he said slowly, "except my own magic that I have anyway. Backsight and insight and all that. Do you mean anything I could do with that?"
"What does your backsight do?"
"It tells me what you would say is going to happen. And the insight sometimes says what is or was happening in other places."
"Is there anything happening just now? Anything that Kay and I could go to see?" Merlin immediately struck himself on the brow and exclaimed excitedly,
"Now I see it all! Yes, of course, there it is. And you are going to see it. Yes, you must take Kay. And hurry up about it. You must go immediately after Mass. Have breakfast first and go immediately after Mass. Yes, that's it. Go straight to Hobbs' strip of barley in the open field and follow that line until you come to something. That will be splendid, yes, and I shall have a nap this afternoon instead of those filthy sumulae logicales. Or have I had the nap?"
"You have not had it," said Archimedes. "That is still in the future, master."
"Splendid, splendid. And mind, Wart, don't forget to take Kay with you so that I can have my nap."
"What shall we see?" asked the wart.
"Ah, don't plague me about a little thing like that. You run along now. There's a good boy. And mind you don't forget to take Kay with you. Why ever didn't you mention it before? Don't forget to follow beyond the strip of barley." "Well, well, well, this is the first half-holiday I have had since I started this confounded tutorship. First, I think I shall have a little nap before luncheon. And then I think I shall have a little nap before tea. Then I shall have to think of something I can do before dinner. What shall I do before dinner, Archimedes?"
"Have a little nap, I expect," said the owl coldly, turning his back upon his master, because he, as well as the wart, enjoyed to see life. Chapter 10. Wart knew that if he told the elder boy about his conversation with Merlin, Kay would refuse to be condescended to and would not come. So he said nothing. It was strange, but their battle had made them friends again, and each could look the other in the eye with a kind of confused affection. They went together unanimously, though shyly, without explanations, and found themselves standing at the end of Hobbs' barley strip after Mass. The wart had no need to use ingenuity. When they were there, it was easy. "Come on," he said. "Merlin told me to tell you that there was something along here that was specially for you."
"What sort of thing?" asked Kay.
"An adventure."
"How do we get to it?"
"We ought to follow along the line which this strip makes, and I suppose that would take us into the forest. We should have to keep the sun just there on our left, but allow for it moving."
"All right," said Kay. "What is the adventure?"
"I don't know."
They went along the strip and followed its imaginary line over the park and over the chase, keeping their eyes skinned for some miraculous happening. They wondered whether half a dozen young pheasants they started had anything curious about them, and Kay was ready to swear that one of them was white. If it had been white, and if a black eagle had suddenly swooped down upon it from the sky, they would have known quite well that wonders were afoot, and that all they had to do was follow the pheasant, or the eagle, until they reached the maiden in the enchanted castle. However, the pheasant was not white. At the edge of the forest, Kay said, "I suppose we shall have to go into this."
Merlin said to follow the line.
"Well," said Kay, "I am not afraid. If the adventure's for me, it is bound to be a good one."
They went in and were surprised to find that the going was not bad. It was about the same as a big wood might be nowadays, whereas the common forest of those times was like a jungle on the Amazon. There were no pheasant shooting proprietors then to see that the undergrowth was thinned, and not 1,000th part of the number of the present-day timber merchants who pruned judiciously at the few remaining woods. The most of the forest sauvage was almost impenetrable, an enormous barrier of eternal trees, the dead ones fallen against the live and held to them by ivy, the living struggling up in competition with each other toward the sun, which gave them life, the floor boggy through lack of drainage or tindery from old wood, so that you might suddenly tumble through a decayed tree trunk into an ant's nest, or laced with brambles and bindweed and honeysuckle and convolvulus and teasels and the stuff which country people call sweethearts, until you would be torn to pieces in 3 yards. This part was good. Hobbs' line pointed down what seemed to be a succession of glades, shady and murmuring places in which the wild thyme was droning with bees. The insect season was past its peak, for it was really the time for wasps and fruit, but there were many fritillaries still, with tortoiseshells and red admirals on the flowering mint. Wart pulled a leaf of this and munched it like chewing gum as they walked. "It is queer," he said, "but there have been people here. Look, there is a hoof mark, and it was shod." "You don't see much," said Kay, "for there is a man." Sure enough, there was a man at the end of the next glade, sitting with a wood axe by the side of a tree which he had felled. He was a queer-looking, tiny man, with a hunched back and a face like mahogany, and he was dressed in numerous pieces of old leather which he had secured about his brawny legs and arms with pieces of cord. He was eating a lump of bread and sheep's milk cheese, with a knife which years of sharpening had worn into a mere streak, leaning his back against one of the highest trees they had ever seen. The white flakes of wood lay all about him. The dressed stump of the felled tree looked very new. His eyes were bright like a fox's. "I expect he will be the adventure," whispered Wart. "Puh," said Kay. "You have knights in armor, or dragons, or things like that in an adventure, not dirty old men cutting wood." "Well, I'm going to ask him what happens along here, anyway." They went up to the small, munching woodman, who did not seem to have seen them, and asked him where the glades were leading to. They asked 2 or 3 times before they discovered that the poor fellow was either deaf or mad or both. He neither answered nor moved. "Oh, come on," said Kay. "He's probably loopy like Watt and does not know what he is at. Let's go on and leave the old fool." They went on for nearly a mile, and still the going was good. There were no paths exactly, and the glades were not continuous. Anybody who came there by chance would have thought there was just the one glade which he was in, a couple of 100 yards long, unless he went to the end of it and discovered another one screened by a few trees. Now and then they found a stump with the marks of the axe on it, but mostly these had been carefully covered with brambles or altogether grubbed up. The Wart considered that the glades must have been made. Kay caught the Wart by the arm at the edge of a clearing and pointed silently toward its further end. There was a grassy bank there, swelling gently to a gigantic sycamore upward of 90 feet high, which stood upon its top. On the bank there was an equally gigantic man lying at his ease, with a dog beside him. This man was as notable as the sycamore, for he stood, or lay, 7 feet, without his shoes, and he was dressed in nothing but a kind of kilt made of Lincoln green worsted. He had a leather bracer on his left forearm. His enormous brown chest supported the dog's head. It had pricked its ears and was watching the boys, but made no other movement, which his muscles gently lifted as they rose and fell. The man appeared to be asleep. There was a 7-foot bow beside him, with some arrows more than a cloth yard long. He, like the woodman, was the color of mahogany, and the curled hairs on his chest made a golden haze where the sun caught them. "He is it," whispered Kay excitedly. They went to the man cautiously for fear of the dog, but the dog only followed them with its eyes, keeping its chin pressed firmly to the chest of its beloved master, and giving them the least suspicion of a wag from its tail. It moved its tail without lifting it, 2 inches sideways in the grass. The man opened his eyes. Obviously, he had not been asleep at all, smiled at the boys, and jerked his thumb in a direction which pointed further up the glade. Then he stopped smiling and shut his eyes. "Excuse me," said Kay. "What happens up there?" The man made no answer and kept his eyes closed, but he lifted his hand again and pointed onward with his thumb. "He means us to go on," said Kay. "It certainly is an adventure," said the wart. "I wonder if that dumb woodsman could have climbed up the big tree he was leaning against and sent a message to this tree that we were coming. He certainly seems to have been expecting us." At this, the naked giant opened one eye and looked at Wart in some surprise. Then he opened both eyes, laughed all over his big twinkling face, sat up, patted the dog, picked up his bow, and rose to his feet. "Very well then, young maesters," he said, still laughing. "Us'll come along, arter all. Young heads do make the sharpest, they do say." Kay looked at him in blank surprise. "Who are you?" he asked. "Naylor," said the giant. "John Naylor in the wide world it were, till us came to be a man of the hood. Then 'twere John Little for some time in the hood like, but mostly folk does put it back'ard now and calls us Little John." "Oh!" cried the wart in delight. "I have heard of you often, when they tell Saxon stories in the evening. Of you and Robin Hood." "Not Hood," said Little John reprovingly. "That bain't the way to name 'em, maester, not in the hood." "But it is Robin Hood in the stories," said Kay.
"Oh, them book-learning chaps. They don't know all. Howmever, 'tis time us do be stepping long."
They fell in on either side of the enormous man and had to run 1 step in 3 to keep up with him, for although he talked very slowly, he walked on his bare feet very fast. The dog trotted at heel. "Please," asked the wart, "where are you taking us?"
"Why, to Robin Hood, seemingly. Aren't you sharp enough to guess that also, Mr. Art?"
The giant gave him a sly peep out of the corner of his eye at this, for he knew that he had set the boys 2 problems at once. First, what was Robin's real name? And second, how did Little John come to know the warts? The wart fixed on the second question first. "How did you know my name?"
"Ah," said Little John, "us knowed."
"Does Robin Hood know we are coming?"
"Nay, my duck, a young scholar like thee should speak his name scholarly."
"Well, what's his name?" cried the boy, between exasperation and being out of breath from running to keep up. "You said Hood."
"So it is Hood, my duck. Robin Hood, like the hoods you'm running through. And a grand fine name it is."
"Robin Wood?"
"Aye, Robin Hood. What else should un be, seeing as he rules 'em? They'm free places, the hoods, and fine places. Let thee sleep in 'em come summer, come winter, and hunt in 'em for thy commons lest thee starve, and smell to 'em as they brings for'ard their comely bright leaves, according to order, or loses of 'em by the same order back'ards. Let thee stand in 'em that thou beest not seen, and move in 'em that thou beest not heard, and warm thee with 'em as thou fallst on sleep. Aye, them proper fine places, the hoods, for a free man of hands and heart."
And that's where we're going to stop for now, because we have a whole Robin Hood and Maid Marian and Morgan Le Fay section coming up. And we will start that next week, Sunday at the 1 o'clock the 1 a.m. reading. So let me close this first so I can get this done without confusing myself. Okay, so with that, I am going to wrap it up. See, this is my wrap it up gesture. No, it's not. I'm just making my hands do things. Excuse me. So with that, I am going to put it to sleep for the night, at least the reading. And I will see you all next week, same time as usual, 1 a.m. and then 7 p.m. on Sundays. I don't think we're at daylight savings yet. I think daylight savings isn't until November, so we don't have to worry about that yet. We don't have to worry about that yet. Okay, so with that, I say thank you very much for spending time with me. Take good care of your loved ones, your friends, your family, anybody who you can offer help to around you. We will all get there together if we stop to help each other along the way. Again, my pleasure to spend time with you. Hope you are all well and stay well, and I will see you next week. And until that time comes, peace and ciao ragazzi, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.